God damn it, we're being buried alive!" Morrison shouted through the radio as thunder ripped through the Colombian sky. The tropical storm swallowed the jungle, rain lashed like whips, and sniper bullets exploded inches from the SEALs' heads. 4 men had fallen in 10 minutes. They screamed for the invisible shooter. And in the mud and water, Rachel Cooper, the interpreter dismissed as a weak Barbie, was quietly assembling a Remington no one knew she'd hidden. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat sank into a cold void, and the world narrowed to a single target. She could save them all, or keep her secret to find her missing fiancé. But a darker truth loomed. Within this SEAL team, someone wanted her dead. Who do you trust when the storm turns everyone into hunters and prey? Thunder roared like the command of a merciless god, tearing the night sky over the Colombian jungle in two. Rain poured in torrents. Heavy drops bent and broke the jungle leaves. Mud churned and frothed. Trees turned into miniature waterfalls. In that chaotic darkness, an American unit floundered. SEAL Team 8, forged in iron discipline and brutal training, now looked no different from a pack of cornered beasts. Sniper shots erupted from somewhere in the rain. Bullets splintered branches. They struck steel plating. They forced burly warriors to dive into the mud for cover. They called to each other with code words. Their voices cracked over the radio. But the loudest sound was Morrison's scream. "Where's the shooter?" He wasn't used to being hunted. He was the hunter, the commander, America's Iron Fist. But tonight rain and gunfire had flipped the roles. Rachel Cooper lay pressed into the mud a few dozen meters away. Rain pounded her face. Her hair clung in heavy, matted clumps. Her soaked uniform felt like a steel cage, binding every movement. To others, this night was hell. To her, it was perfect camouflage. Mud masked her breathing, rain erased her tracks, thunder muffled the clink of metal. In the chaos, no one would notice when a doll turned into a blade. 2 weeks earlier, when the C-130 landed at the forward base, Rachel stepped off with only a translator's backpack. Her hair was neatly tied. Her brown eyes were calm and steady. Beside her stood 8 men like living marble statues. Muscled, tattooed, their gazes dripping with scorn. Specialist Cooper, assigned to your unit by the CIA. Davidson, the highest-ranking officer, said curtly. Morrison sized her up from head to toe. His gray-blue eyes gleamed with mockery. "A translator, Barbie? In a war zone?" The team burst into laughter. The sound rang like hammers striking the air. From that day, they gave her nicknames: Princess, Ornament, Maid. At the first meals, Stevens deliberately bumped her tray, spilling beans and rice across the floor. "Pick it up, Barbie," he sneered. Tank, built like a refrigerator, blocked her path and pointed to an empty table in the corner. "This isn't a place for princesses." They thought she'd just bow her head and take it. And she did. Rachel bent down, picking up every grain of rice, but behind her lowered eyelids, she memorized every limping gait, every old scar, every tick of Morrison's jaw when he wanted to assert dominance. On the 5th day, they locked her in a container under the blazing sun. 6 hours turned the steel into an oven. The temperature soared past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air thickened. Her lungs seemed to collapse. Rachel sat in the darkness, eyes closed, taking shallow breaths, using the heart rate control techniques she'd learned in her covert unit. She pictured Michael's face, her fiancé, lost somewhere in this maze of jungles and hidden prisons. Each passing second, instead of breaking her, forged her resolve. When the container door swung open, they expected a broken woman. But Rachel stepped out, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling, yet standing tall. Vega, the only one showing a hint of concern, handed her a water bottle. She drank, nodded faintly, and hid a small smile beneath the caked mud. Tonight's storm was just another giant container, but this time, not for enduring, but for hunting. Inside her translator backpack were familiar pieces: A barrel hidden in a camera lens, a stock disguised as a laptop stand, a trigger mechanism tucked among translation tools. For 2 weeks, she disassembled, reassembled, and visualized every motion. And as the rain hammered the earth, Rachel knew it was time. Far off, Morrison was still shouting for the sniper's position. A bullet grazed inches from his head. The SEALs began to tremble. Their confidence cracked like frosted glass. Rachel pressed her rifle into the mud, letting the cold metal touch her skin. Her heartbeat slowed. Each thunderclap merged with her breath. In her eyes, the jungle was no longer chaotic darkness. It was a chessboard. And every square on that board she knew by heart. They still didn't know the one they called Barbie was the figure whispered about in the underworld. Ghost 7. Dear audience, pause for a moment to subscribe to the channel before continuing with the main story, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. It's exciting to see people from all over joining us. In the storm, the makeshift tent of military tarps shook as if it might rip from the earth. Rain seeped through the seams, dripping onto the muddy floor, pooling around Rachel's dirt-caked boots. Outside, gunfire and thunder merged into a deadly rhythm, both familiar and alien. She sat alone. A dim flashlight bulb fixed to an iron pole cast white light on her drenched face. On the table before her wasn't an ordinary camera, as everyone assumed. It was a sophisticated disguise. The cracked lens had been gutted, holding sniper maps and optical data. The casing stored satellite imagery and the SEALs' patrol schedules. Every photo she'd pretended to take of local customs was a pin on a covert map. Rachel quietly spread out waterproof papers, scribbling notes with a soft pencil. Jungle perimeters, hidden paths, ideal sniper vantage points all formed a labyrinth detailed enough to stun any field officer. But for Rachel, it was still missing one piece. Michael. The last image of him was a fleeting glimpse in emergency data, his face bruised, sent over a frantic channel with a trembling message. They know. Davidson's dirty. Love you. Those words cut into her memory like a blade. For 6 months, she'd lived like a shadow, volunteering for this death zone to pull him back. Ghost 7 didn't fight for honor. Ghost 7 fought for one person, and for the innocent who'd been betrayed. The rain pounded harder, tearing at the tarp, making the flashlight flicker. Rachel gathered her maps, tucking them into the bottom of her backpack under language translation files. When Morrison passed by, she was the weak interpreter again, hands trembling as she clutched her notebook, eyes averted in fear. He gave her a look, half contempt, half distraction, then moved on. That dismissal was her perfect shield. That night, as the storm eased, she slipped outside. The jungle was pitch black, the air thick with damp earth and the iron tang of old blood. Rachel knelt by a tree, opening her backpack. One by one, metal pieces glinted under lightning. A long barrel from the lens case, a stock pieced from aluminum frames, a trigger mistaken for translation gear. Her hands moved like instinct, assembling in silence. Muscle memory guided every step. When the Remington lay complete in her lap, a strange calm enveloped Rachel. Outside, rain fell, guns fired, and the SEALs cursed over the radio. But in the small world behind her scope, there was only her heartbeat and ballistic trajectories. Ghost 7 was back, not with fanfare, not with declarations. She simply existed. But a strange sound stopped her. In the distance, through the white haze of rain, she saw a red light flashing. Not enemy signals, SEAL internal code. Someone in the team was sending a private signal. She stayed still, adjusting her thermal scope. Through the trees, a SEAL silhouette appeared, radio on his shoulder, lips murmuring. The signal wasn't on U.S. frequencies. It was urgent, brief, cold. Someone in the team was talking to Wagner. The storm's wind tore through the canopy, erasing all traces. But Rachel had seen enough. The stance, the black glove, the faint scar on the wrist. The evidence was incomplete, but her gut was certain. A traitor was in the SEAL team. She dismantled the rifle, its parts vanishing into her backpack as if they'd never existed. Back at the tent, Vega stood guard. He glanced at her for a second, but his look was different from the others, not contempt, not mockery. It was suspicion, a recognition of something deeper in this small woman. Rachel nodded faintly, passed by, and let him stew in his thoughts. In the darkness, the storm still howled. But for Rachel, it had become a ticking clock. Not only were enemies out there, but within the team, a traitor's bullet waited to fire. All right, dear audience, if you're watching and find this story gripping, comment 1 or I'm still here to keep listening. The storm outside still roared, but inside the training tent, another storm was brewing. Wet training mats, soaked by rain, were dragged onto the dirt floor. The SEALs gathered in a circle. They weren't about to miss the entertainment Morrison had just announced. "Translator Princess, step up," Morrison barked, his voice overpowering the rain hammering the tarp. He loomed large. Muscles bulged under his dark t-shirt. His cold, gleaming eyes sparkled with amusement. Stevens and Tank snickered, like schoolboys eager for a lesson in dominance. Vega stood back, arms crossed, his gaze quiet. Rachel stepped forward. She knew exactly what was coming. A demonstration disguised as close-quarters combat training. A public humiliation to reinforce the pecking order. To them, she was the weak link, and Morrison wanted the team to see that weakness exposed. No warning signal came. Morrison grabbed her collar, spun, and slammed her down. Rachel's body flew across the mat, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The air was crushed from her lungs. Her chest burned. She curled up, shielding her face, shoulders trembling, the perfect image of a victim. The team roared with laughter. The sound blended with thunder into a cruel symphony. Morrison didn't stop. He lunged, locking her arm in a hold, yanking it back. Her tendons strained. Her joints creaked. But her eyes stayed fixed on the ground, hiding a spark of defiance. Her body screamed counter commands. Break his elbow, shift hips, flip him. 3 moves, he's unconscious. 5 moves, he's dead. But she didn't act. She couldn't. Ghost 7 couldn't reveal herself here, not in front of them. The mission remained. Michael was still out there. So Rachel clenched her teeth, letting her shoulders shake as if breaking, letting Morrison win his humiliation game. "This is the real world, Cooper," Morrison whispered, his breath thick with sweat and arrogance. "The bad guys will crush you just because they can, and that's why you don't belong here." He released her, letting her crumple like a torn leaf. Stevens whistled mockingly. Tank laughed. Most turned away. No one challenged the alpha wolf. Rachel lay still for a few seconds, back arched, eyes closed. Not from pain. She'd endured harsher training, deeper wounds. What choked her was the storm inside the storm of wanting to strike back, of a hunter's instinct forced to play prey. She heard the rain tapping the tent, like a clock counting down. Each drop, each second, each minute built a wall of patience. She'd survived the container's furnace, endured their mocking laughter, stayed silent when they stole Michael's photo. If she could survive that, a few body slams were nothing. As the tent cleared, the SEALs dispersed. Rachel curled up in a corner, wiping mud from her face. Her hands trembled, but her eyes held something sharper than a blade. That night, as the others slept, she quietly assembled her rifle in the dark. The click of each piece, locking into place, echoed like her heartbeat steadying. Each motion, each tightened screw, was a promise. Today's patience would be tomorrow's justice. The next morning, the storm hadn't lifted. The jungle was drenched. Trails turned to muddy streams. The SEALs began their patrol mission. Weary, Morrison led, rifle ready, his voice lost in the rain. "Keep formation. Don't let those bastards get the drop on us." Rachel followed, eyes locked on every tree. In her vision, high points and gaps in the canopy glowed. The map she'd drawn the night before came alive before her. Then, when a figure moved in the distance, her instincts flared. Not a SEAL, not an ally. A faint puff of smoke flashed. The first shot came from the east, tearing through the humid jungle air. A SEAL collapsed into the mud, blood mixing with rain like red ink. Before anyone could react, a second shot rang out from the opposite direction, slicing through wet trees, snapping a rotten branch near Morrison's ear. The jungle became a theater of invisible death. The SEALs dove for cover, scrambling for thin trees and soggy mounds that offered little protection. Bullets whistled overhead, leaves exploded, mud sprayed. Morrison shouted orders over the radio, but his voice faltered amidst the rain and gunfire, stripped of authority. In under 10 minutes, 2 men were down, another badly wounded. Fear crept silently into the eyes of the once arrogant. Rachel lay flat in the mud, heart racing. From her position 30 meters away, she saw the whole scene. The rain hid her from prying eyes but blurred the world, making it hard to predict. 5 Wagner snipers were spread out, hidden in high points and jungle hollows, trained to turn the forest into a graveyard. And they were succeeding. For a moment, she hesitated. The cover she'd maintained for 2 weeks would vanish with one trigger pull. The entire infiltration plan could collapse. But staying silent meant the team would be wiped out here, and her chance to find Michael would be gone. His face flashed in her mind, green eyes staring from memory. His last words a command. "They know. Get out. Love you." Rachel's finger tightened on the zipper. In the pouring rain, she quietly opened her backpack. Cold metal pieces emerged, snapping together like the bones of a buried creature. She worked with precision. Each motion was clean, silent, separate from the chaos around her. The Remington 700 rose in her hands, its wet barrel gleaming under lightning. The thermal scope lit up, showing white figures against the jungle's black. Body heat glowed like torches. Rachel slowed her breathing. Her heartbeat matched the rain's rhythm. The familiar moment returned, the moment when the world shrank to distance, wind, and trajectory. Her first shot was a whisper. The suppressed sound became a cough, nearly swallowed by the storm. At nearly 800 meters, a Wagner sniper fell back, eyes not yet widened. Morrison looked up, stunned, searching for the shot's source. No one in the team knew what had happened. The second shot was faster, piercing foliage, punching through enemy armor like paper. A shadow dropped from a tree, vanishing into the underbrush. Stevens gaped. Tank stammered something futile. Death reigned around them, and no one saw the hand guiding it. Rachel moved, leaving no trace, a ghost sliding through the mud. The third shot caught an enemy shifting positions, the bullet meeting him on the edge of life and death. The fourth, the hardest, threaded a gap no wider than a dinner plate, taking a shoulder exposed for a split second. The body fell, heavy, silent. One remained. The last Wagner soldier panicked, choosing to run. But at nearly a kilometer, his movement was as good as standing still in her scope. The final shot closed the chapter in under 43 seconds. The jungle fell silent, save for the rain. 5 bodies lay scattered, their blood mixed with the wet earth. The SEALs stood frozen, staring at each other in disbelief. Morrison breathed heavily. The radio crackled, but his orders stuck in his throat. Rachel stood. Mud coated her from hair to boots, but her small frame carried the weight of an undeniable truth. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, stepped from the foliage, appearing 30 meters from the team. In the stunned gazes of those who'd seen her as a burden, Rachel let the rifle show. Morrison spun, raising his weapon toward her, but his hands shook, and he lowered the barrel. His face shifted from anger to shock, settling on something close to fear. Stevens choked. Tank stepped back. Vega just stared, less surprised than the others. Without a word, Rachel opened her jacket, pulling out an ID badge. On it, a cold name, Ghost 7. The storm's wind howled. Rain lashed her face, but the silence between them was louder than thunder. The storm hadn't stopped, but the jungle was eerily quiet. 5 Wagner bodies lay in the mud, their blood washed into dark streaks by the rain. The SEALs huddled together, eyes wide, staring at Rachel as if a monster in human skin had emerged from the dark. Rachel kept the Remington across her shoulder, offering no defense, no explanation. She only watched the faces before her. Morrison's face burned red, his jaw clenched, his pride crushed but still clinging to command. Stevens gaped, lips trembling as if to speak, then swallowing his words. Tank hid behind a scowl, half fear, half rage. Only Vega stood still, his eyes darkening, as if he'd long awaited this moment. There was no time for arguments. Rachel knelt to check the wounded, her hands coldly efficient, bandaging, stopping blood, stabilizing fractures. Her precision stunned even those who'd once mocked her as dead weight. Amid the chaos, she was calm, as if this were routine. "We have 10 minutes before Wagner sends their main force," Rachel said evenly. No need to shout. Her tone was firm, commanding, with no trace of the interpreter who'd been mocked or locked in a container. "We move north. 4 miles. The prison holding captives is there." Morrison opened his mouth to object, but met her gaze through the mud-streaked scope. A cold, sharp look that allowed no negotiation. In that moment, he fell silent. Command had quietly shifted. They moved out. The jungle greeted them with muddy trails. Water reached their ankles. Soaked leaves slapped their faces. Rachel led, her ghillie suit caked with debris but moving near invisibly. The SEALs followed, quieter than usual, eyes darting. No more mocking laughs, no more biting remarks. Only heavy breaths and tension like a blade at their throats. In Rachel's mind, the previous night's map was vivid. She recalled every turn, every mound, every gap that could be a deadly trap. Each raised hand stopped the team. Those who'd locked her in a steel box now entrusted their lives to her small hands. But danger wasn't only in the jungle. Within the team, the traitor's shadow lingered. Rachel remembered the red light flashing in the storm, the scar on the wrist of the signaler. In the rain, she stole quick glances at each man. Morrison touched his jaw, but his hands bore no scars. Stevens moved clumsily, limping slightly on his left knee. Tank's shoulders were uneven, but his wrists were clean. Vega trailed at the rear, silent, and a faint scar gleamed under his wet glove. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Was it just an old wound, or the mark she sought? She couldn't rush to judge. One wrong move would ruin everything. The team halted as footsteps echoed. 6 Russian figures appeared ahead, patrolling steadily, rifles slung but eyes sharp. Rachel signaled to take cover. Morrison frowned, about to speak, but Vega gripped his shoulder, silencing him. The Wagner soldiers passed 40 meters away, their boots crunching wet leaves. A groan from the wounded SEAL nearly betrayed them, but Tank clamped a hand over his mouth. One heartbeat from discovery. The footsteps faded. Rachel signaled to move. The team waded through a stream, letting water hide their tracks. Breaths were ragged, but no one spoke. Each felt it. Someone among them might have sold them out. As the jungle thinned, an open clearing appeared, with wooden and steel fortifications in the distance. The prison. Dawn was breaking. Faint light pierced the canopy. Rachel dropped her backpack, pulling out gear no one believed she carried. A scope worth tens of thousands, a tablet displaying drone data, a slim steel cutting tool. The SEALs stared, their doubt now mixed with awe. 11 heat signatures in the northern building, Rachel whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. 11 prisoners. Guard change at 6. That's our window. Morrison's face tightened. You expect us to trust you after… Rachel looked up, her gaze cutting him off. After I saved your lives? Trust or don't. But if you want to survive the next hour, follow me. Dear audience, are you still here? Take a moment to relax, maybe grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this gripping story. Comment 1 if you find it thrilling. Don't forget to subscribe. No one said more. The team knew that since the shots rang out in the storm, the world had changed. They were no longer in control, and the woman they dismissed was now the only compass guiding them through a deadly maze. Dawn rose. Morning light fell through the leaves, illuminating lingering fog. Below, the prison stood like a crude block of iron and wood, hastily built but heavily fortified, as if grown from the damp earth. Watchtowers loomed at four corners. Guards moved in steady circles, their eyes scanning the jungle with weary alertness. Rachel and the SEALs lay flat on a slope, observing from a distance. They'd slogged through mud, streams, and jungle for hours, carrying the wounded, carrying heavy doubts. Now, they waited in silence for the clock to hit 6. In that waiting moment, Rachel felt her heartbeat. Not fast, not erratic, but steady, as if her body had learned to turn stress into rhythm. She adjusted her scope, sweeping each tower. 4 guards, 2 changing shifts, 2 staring down with boredom. She marked firing angles, calculated wind, measured distance. Everything was under control. As the guards changed, a window opened. Rachel signaled. The team rushed down, blending into the fog, moving fast and silent like shadows. Morrison and Stevens dragged the wounded. Tank covered the rear. Vega stayed close to Rachel, his eyes scanning every bush as if reading the jungle's breath. They reached the barbed wire fence. Rachel pulled out her cutters, snipping wires silently. The gap was just wide enough to crawl through. The team slipped in, breaths held with each move. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, old blood, and cheap tobacco smoke. Rachel led, her suppressed pistol quietly aiming down narrow paths. A guard rounded a corner ahead. She moved like a breath, her hand clamping his mouth, her knife sinking cleanly into his throat. The heavy body fell soundlessly. She dragged it into the shadows, wiping blood from the floor. A dark hallway led to the basement. The steel door was locked with a cheap electronic system, one Rachel had cracked hundreds of times in missions. Her fingers danced over a decryption device. Lights flickered, then died. The door clicked open. Inside was the stench of damp and faint groans. The narrow room held makeshift cells filled with broken people. Rachel opened each one, her eyes scanning every face. The first, bruised but alive. The second, gaunt, trembling as he stood. The third, chest crusted with dried blood. She counted, one by one, until all 11 prisoners were gathered. Their desperate eyes turned to shock upon seeing her. One man whispered, trembling, but Rachel pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence. She led them in a line, guiding them through the dark hallway. The SEALs split up to support each prisoner, their gazes no longer mocking but focused on survival. As they reached the yard, dawn tore through the fog. A jungle rooster crowed somewhere, absurdly signaling a normal morning in an abnormal place. Rachel led them to the fence's gap, her heart pounding. 11 people. She stopped, counted again. Once more. Only 11. Michael wasn't here. The ground seemed to collapse beneath her. For a moment, everything blurred. She checked the heat signature list, scanned the faces before her. No familiar green eyes, no smile that had driven her through 2 weeks of hell. Inside her chest, a void spread, a black hole swallowing light. But outwardly, Rachel's face remained steel. She signaled Morrison to lead the prisoners out. Gunfire from the south signaled a diversion. Stevens and Tank helped the frail through the fence. Vega watched the rear. Rachel paused, staring into the dark prison. The shadows seemed to hold Michael somewhere else, farther, more dangerous. Hurried footsteps snapped her back. She crawled through the fence, blending into the jungle with the rescued. Behind them, the prison shook with gunfire, screams, then chaos. They'd succeeded, but for Rachel, the victory was half empty. Michael was still out there in the enemy's maze, and now, to find him, she'd face a truth colder than death. The traitor in her own team had kept Michael from her reach. The group left the jungle as sunlight pierced the canopy. Golden light fell on the prisoners' pale faces, turning them into ghosts escaping hell. The SEALs helped them onto old trucks hidden near a trail. Engines roared, echoing through the forest, proclaiming their survival. Rachel sat in the back, eyes glued to a laptop on her knees. The screen showed data from the strange signal in the storm. A sequence of codes flashed, deliberate, not random. Someone had sent the team's position to Wagner. The traitor was here, steps away. The storm outside had cleared. But inside Rachel, another storm surged. Her gaze swept the team. Morrison drove, jaw tight, both proud and burdened. Stevens clutched his bandaged arm, pale from blood loss. Tank slouched, half-conscious. Vega sat at the back, face calm, black gloves still on. On his left wrist, under the fabric, a faint scar gleamed in the light filtering through the window. Instinct gripped Rachel. The memory of that rainy night returned. The red light, the secret gesture, the figure in the downpour. She stayed silent, her hand tightening on the pistol hidden under her jacket. She couldn't reveal too soon. One wrong beat, and it would all dissolve into blood. The truck sped along a red dirt road toward the highway. Bogota lay ahead, bustling and dangerous. But before the city came into view, a low engine rumble echoed. Rachel looked up. Armored trucks appeared at both ends of the road, blocking it like steel walls. Gunfire erupted, glass shattered, dirt flew. Wagner had been waiting. The convoy plunged into chaos. Morrison yanked the wheel, the truck lurched, nearly tipping. Stevens screamed. Tank pulled prisoners into a roadside ditch. Vega leaped from the truck bed, rifle in hand, shouting urgent orders. Rachel heard nothing clearly, only saw blood and dust mixing with noon sunlight, turning the highway into a battlefield. She climbed onto the truck's roof, gripping the reassembled Remington. Bullets tore the air. She dropped a shooter on an enemy tower. A second shot pierced an armored truck's windshield, felling the driver. The highway became a metal maze, vehicles exploding like fireballs. In the haze, Rachel glimpsed Vega. He wasn't firing at the enemy but at the convoy's tires. Rubber shredded, metal sparked. Prisoners screamed as the truck skidded. His eyes met Rachel's. Cold, no longer hiding. The traitor was unmasked. Rachel shifted, clinging to the truck's frame, aligning her rifle. But Vega was faster. He darted through the smoke, leaping to another vehicle, dragging a small prisoner as a living shield. In a flash, Rachel recognized the prisoner's face. A young CIA officer, eyes desperate, like Michael's in memory. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Wagner's bullets rained, grazing her. The wind roared. Smoke and blood mingled, blurring the world into white and red. Vega vanished into the chaos, pulling the prisoner toward an enemy armored truck. Morrison called her from afar, his voice lost in the blasts. Rachel didn't answer. She crouched, taking a deep breath. Her heart was heavy as stone. Michael wasn't among the rescued, and now Vega had shown his face. It meant Michael was alive but in the traitor's hands. This fight wasn't over. It had only deepened. As the dust settled, the convoy was reduced to smoldering steel and scattered bodies. Some prisoners had escaped, but the cost was steep. Rachel stood alone on the highway, staring at the horizon where Wagner's trucks vanished. Hot wind whipped her wet hair, leaving a brutal silence. She bent down, picking up a mud-stained 7 of spades from the ground. No one knew where it came from. No one could explain it. But to Rachel it was a reminder. Ghost 7 could not vanish. The ghost had to hunt to the end. The storm had passed. The Bogota highway held only charred steel, gray smoke rising like incense for lost souls. The seals, once proud, now carried wounds not just in flesh but in trust. They'd seen a ghost rise from the mud, dropping 5 Wagner snipers in 43 seconds. They'd seen the truth behind the thin translator's uniform. Ghost 7 wasn't a myth. Ghost 7 was blood, breath, a gaze piercing the dark. But Vega, the only one who'd shown concern when she was locked away, who'd offered water when others turned away. He was the dagger in the team's heart. And he'd vanished with a prisoner, leaving a question larger than any bullet. Michael was still out there. Davidson was dead. But the dealers of bloody secrets remained. This battle wasn't over. It had only begun. From Colombia's jungles to Bogota's streets. From Wagner's shadows to the corridors of power where traitors hid. Rachel stood amid the ashes, clutching the 7 of spades like her own fate. The world called her a legend, but she knew the truth. Ghost 7 could never rest. Because monsters keep forging hunters. And justice always needs a ghost.